So Tony, you're live.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Gugliotto, and I'd like to welcome you to TransLink's last open board meeting of 2021. Thank you all for joining us virtually today. And at this point, I'd like to call today's meeting to order. So first, I'd like to start by saying that we acknowledge, respect, and celebrate the Indigenous nations on whose territories we are fortunate to live, work, operate, and serve, and recognize that in planning and managing the region's transportation system, we have a role to play in supporting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. To start the meeting, I'd like to share some of the changes that are coming to the board in 2022. So first, we have a few new faces to welcome and a few changes in terms of the makeup of the board. So I'd like to start by congratulating Lorraine Cunningham on her appointment to the board chair for 2022. Lorraine has served as TransLink's board vice chair for the past 2 years. And before that, she served for 6 years on the TransLink board, spending the last couple of years as chair. So she has previous experience. Her board and committee work has encompassed finance, audit, governance, HR, risk management, safety, special events, and fundraising. As I mentioned, Lorraine has done the job before, and I know that the board is in good hands with Lorraine taking over the reins on January the 1st. So please extend a warm welcome to Lorraine as board chair. We're also pleased that Harj Dhaliwal has been reappointed to the TransLink board for a second term. Harj has been on the board since January of 2019, and his 3 years on the board have been very much appreciated. And I'm sure, Harj, the board is looking forward to working with you for the next 3 years as well. I also like to welcome two new board members, Jennifer Chan and Harpinder Sandhu. So Jennifer serves the public interest as a policy lawyer for the Law Society of British Columbia. She holds degrees from Harvard, Oxford University, Victoria, and UBC. Jennifer served on the Vancouver Public Library Board for 8 years, including 2 years as chair. She has also served on the board of the Continuing Legal Education Society of BC and on the Vancouver Foundation's Environment and Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. So welcome to TransLink, Jennifer. Now, Harpinder Sandhu has served as board trustee for the BC Public Services Pension Plan. He's the investment chair for the BC Municipal Pension Plan, a board member for the Shareholder Association for Research and Education, and founding member of the Canadian Capital Stewardship Network. He's also committee chair of the UN-sponsored Principles of Responsible Investment. Harpinder has also co-authored 2 major policy papers on housing affordability, and he holds degrees from SFU and U of T and has earned the ICD designation. So welcome, Harpinder, to you as well. I would also like to extend my thanks on behalf of the board to Larry Beasley, whose last board meeting is today. So this concludes Larry's 6th year on the board, and his insights and experience have been incredibly valuable to TransLink. For the full 6 years, Larry chaired the Planning and Stakeholders Relations Committee, and his past experience in the planning area has really been helpful for TransLink over the past 6 years, particularly on our recent work with 2050. Larry and I have actually joined the board at the same time 6 years ago, and from the day one, I know that Larry has been a passionate advocate for our customers. In fact, most of the actions in our customer action service plan were ideas put forward by Larry. So thank you, Larry, for your years of service. I'd also like to mention that this is Jeff Cross's last board meeting. Now, Jeff has been with TransLink for 13 years and has led the plan and policy division for the past 5, leading many key strategy files that help Metro Vancouver region attain its status as North American leader in transit-oriented development and transit ridership growth. Jeff, we really wish you the best as you begin the next chapter of your life, and thank you for all you've done for TransLink for those past 13 years. So as we've heard, lots of movement is happening on this board, and within TransLink, I'd like to take this time now to mention that this will also be my last board meeting. My term is done at the end of the year, and I want to extend my sincere thanks to each of the board members that I've worked with over the past years, to all the TransLink employees that I've worked with over my term. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work alongside such an engaged and thoughtful group of people. And I really appreciate your passion and commitment to TransLink. I have a lot of faith for the future of public transportation in Metro Vancouver, and I look forward to seeing how you'll continue to adapt to meet the needs of the region. So those are all the changes that I wanted to sort of touch on. They're pretty significant, but I know that TransLink will continue to do well and is in good hands. So we have a lot to discuss today. So we'll begin our meeting with public delegations.
Tony?
Yes?
Tony, before you go to public delegations,
Sure.
we can't leave without saying a few words about you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank you and to take a moment to talk about your service on the board. In the past 4 years as board chair and 6 years of service on the board, we've seen great transportation achievements in Metro Vancouver. Your leadership as board chair has steered TransLink through the multimodal expansion, the upgrades to Metro Vancouver's transportation network, significant customer experience improvements, and the maintenance of a resilient, award-winning transportation network. More recently, you've guided us through the challenges of responding for the past year and a half to this pesky pandemic. From all of us on the board, we thank you for your leadership, Tony, and we look forward to seeing what's in store for you next after you have a well-deserved break.
Thank you, Lorraine. I appreciate those comments. And as I mentioned, it's been an honor and a privilege to work with everyone for the past 6 years. Okay, so we'll now turn to our public delegations. We have 4 speakers lined up, and our first speaker is Mark Beeching. So Mark, are you on the line there?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. So you have 5 minutes. I'll turn over the floor to you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. We're all dismayed at the suffering and loss stemming from disaster that result from global warming. It's vital that messages of solidarity and support come with action. Every person and organization must take steps. We must plan ahead. Transit authorities and governments recognize that our very survival rely on safe, clean public transit. The legislature's BC budget report 2022 consultation recommends investing in electric buses and increasing accessible transportation options such as HandyDART. Many steps are being taken. Unfortunately, paratransit HandyDART in Metro Vancouver is omitted from these plans, largely due to an inability to secure infrastructure where green technology could be installed. The provincial, federal, and regional funds, BC Transit Victoria is building a new permanent HandyDART center to respond to the growing needs for HandyDART services in Greater Victoria, with infrastructure to support a fully fleet electric fleet installed during construction. TransLink has a detailed low-carbon fleet transition plan that fails to even mention HandyDART. Multiple manufacturers are already taking orders for electric vehicles suitable for HandyDART use. Many of the present HandyDART vehicles are based on Ford Transit chassis, and Ford is already taking orders for electric 2022 Transit chassis. It is not practical to electrify TransLink's HandyDART fleet without permanently publicly owned operations and maintenance centers. It is time for Metro Vancouver Regional District and TransLink to do what Victoria has already done, get funding from provincial and federal government for permanent operation centers with equipment for charging electric vehicles. Electric buses have many advantages beyond reducing greenhouse gas pollution, yet TransLink is excluding HandyDART from their low carbon fleet transition plan. TransLink HandyDART facilities are all rented. It makes no sense to install millions of dollars in charging equipment in a temporary location. In contrast, BC Transit is building a completely new publicly owned HandyDART center in Victoria with infrastructure to charge fully electric HandyDART fleet so seniors and people with disabilities can benefit from quieter vehicles and cleaner air. This happens because municipal politicians in Greater Victoria pushed for an electric HandyDART fleet. Lacking permanent infrastructure has displaced HandyDART facilities too often to count historically. Ironically, one location was not only substandard, but subject to significant flooding, continually running gas pumps to try to keep ahead of the Fraser River. In North Vancouver, several facilities have caused massive idling times due to trains and having to travel miles out of their way to get to the depot when they had to access the depot by going across to Vancouver and back. I remind you that at the November 26, 2021 MRVD board meeting, an agenda item was presented, and board meeting TransLink application for federal gas funding for 2023 depot infrastructure, fleet replacement, and fleet design was presented. If Metro Vancouver TransLink board, mayors, and councillors truly care about clean air, climate action, and rights of seniors and people with disabilities, they will push hard to get provincial and federal funding for a permanent handy-dart center for an expanded 100% handy-dart fleet. The inability of a privatized system with handy-dart has continually caused long-standing problems and disruptions in service. It is time now to recognize people with disabilities and seniors deserve a truly public transit system, and the planet needs us to step up and move towards electrification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate you coming and providing those comments. We'll now go to our speaker, Joe Kunstler.
Chair Gugliotta, I think he has not been able to join us yet this morning.
Okay, so why don't we move on to our next speaker, Diane Gillis. Diane, are you there?
I am, thank you.
Okay, Diane, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm aware that the many facets required for the implementation of public transportation are complex, and I'm here before you today to share what I hope is constructive information and to request actions that I believe, if taken, will be beneficial for all. I strongly believe we all have a role in contributing towards our communities being the best they can be, and believe this includes liaising with, for example, you, TransLink leaders who provide public transportation in our communities. For the past 17 years, I've dedicated some of my time building our community, the motto of a neighborhood association I founded. One of the things we as community members continue to work toward is improving safety on and around transit in our community. On March 22nd, 2019, I appeared before you regarding the reluctance of some working, living, and attending school, including the provincial school for the deaf in our community, to using transit due to safety concerns when walking toward and away from Royal Oak Station, particularly when daylight hours were shorter. This reluctance persists despite our efforts over the years towards safety improvements. A continuing concern is the lack of lighting and visibility. Subsequent to the March 2000 meeting, I was advised TransLink would be adding lighting under the SkyTrain from Royal Oak Station to Gilly. The lighting was installed from Royal Oak to McPherson. I was told a different power source was needed for lighting from McPherson to Gilly and was to be installed later that year, though to date it has not been installed. On October 25th this year, 5.5 weeks ago, after receiving calls from community members via the lights from Royal Oak to McPherson failing, I contacted TransLink to report this, requesting the lighting be fixed and operational. Myself and others have made subsequent calls, yet the lights have not been repaired or replaced. Yesterday morning at about 11 a.m., I was in the area where the lights have and continue to fail. I counted 14, and I believe a total of 14 lights. 4 are working, with the others either burnt out or flickering as they do when it is dark. As I said, this was 11 a.m. yesterday that they were on. Since March 2019, there have at times been dumping, including mattresses and sofas, in the overgrowth under the SkyTrain east of McPherson to Buller. We're aware BC Hydro is responsible for maintenance of the overgrowth in some areas. The City of Burnaby has picked up the dumping. As a result of this activity in the area, it was identified as a SPAT, special attention filed by transit police. People increasingly avoided walking on BC Parkway in this area, as there were often gatherings of people who intimidated those who normally walk or cycled there. When there were not gatherings, there were items such as feces and used syringes, which also deter people from walking on BC Parkway as they normally would have. Due to efforts of the City of Burnaby, some factors contributed to the gatherings and related problem behaviors have been addressed, and the gatherings are no longer a concerning norm. Concerns for safety in areas of transit in Burnaby have resulted in the City of Burnaby allocating $9.8 million to install lighting, similar to the lighting installed by Coquitlam for the Evergreen line in Burnaby along the Expo line from Patterson to Edmonds, with completion by January 2023. The lighting is intended to optimize safety with more people using SkyTrain and more in the area, as it will be more welcoming. I'm not sure how other municipalities might address this. I humbly suggest that CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design assessments, be done of existing TransLink property as part of the process of future development by TransLink. Lighting and sight lines are a particular concern. In preparing what I have shared with you today, I've read the Transport 2050 document. Staff at the office of one of our South Burnaby MLAs printed the document for me. I shared with them, I was reading it to prepare for this presentation. One of the staff mentioned a friend lives in the area and shared the same concerns I'm sharing with you. At this time of recurring environmental activity, attributed in large part to global warming, it is even more important that we do what we can to optimize the use of public transportation, thus reducing the use of motor vehicles. Thank you for the opportunity to share the information I have today. I do know there are many factors that contribute to optimal transit ridership and use, and hope what I've shared today is constructive. In closing, I'd like to thank you for what you do and acknowledge the great assistance of Brad Monet, Board Assistant, and I want to acknowledge the leadership of Chief Dave Jones and the work of Metro Vancouver Transit Police, who I know we can support by working together for optimal safety on transit. As Robert Peel said, the police are the public and the public are the police being only members of the public who are paid to give full attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. I believe safe, more livable, enjoyable communities such as safe transit, optimal transit are payment members of the public receive for efforts to support safety in our communities. Thank you again for all you do and the opportunity to share what I hope is constructive toward optimal transit use for all.
Great. Thank you very much, Diane, for bringing this issue to the attention of the board. And I'll ask management to follow up with you with respect to the issues that you've raised. We'll go to our next speaker, Nathan Daviditz. Nathan, are you there?
Hello?
Hey, Nathan.
Hello?
Yeah, Nathan, we can hear you. First, Nathan, before you start, I had a chance to read the article in the Georgia Strait. So congratulations. I thought that was a very good article on all the work that you've done for transit over the many years. Go ahead, Nathan. The floor is yours. Did we lose Nathan?
Hello, yeah, it's Nathan Davidovich calling.
Oh, hi, Nathan. Did you
Hello?
hear what? Can you hear us, Nathan?
I can sort of hear you, not that great, but or maybe it's is it better now?
Okay, I can hear you better now. Did you hear the words that I said about the article in the Georgia Strait?
Oh, no, I didn't hear it because when they I was not connected to the meeting when I was put on hold. Like at the city halls, you could hear the meeting while you are being hold to on your line to speak. But I presume your system is different.
Yeah. Well, I was just congratulating you on the Georgia Strait article for your many years of service in the transit world. But go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chair and board members. Yes, over the past year, I have sent you over 400 emails and probably over 100 phone calls to your customer service, but very little has been done. Transit system of over 130 years is slowly being damaged. And I'll just talk about three things on your agenda. Coast Mountain Bus Company, page 16 out of 182. They don't have the statistics still that they provide to Statistics Canada. They don't have the ridership number for buses, sea buses, West Vancouver, Bourne Island, Langley Community Shuttles. BCRTC provide these ridership numbers and why doesn't Coast Mountain Bus Company does. Standard statistics should be provided. They are provided all over the world on at least monthly basis. The MTA in New York City even provides daily statistics. The C buses thing, you increased it in September from 2 C buses to 3, but the ridership actually went down from 300,000 to 270,000. There is no need for three C buses. We're just wasting more money. It's not needed until the ridership goes up, which is going to be at least another year, and the fare going to change from 2 zones to 1 zone as was approved in 2018 by TransLink Mayor Council to change the fare structure, but that was never implemented. The other item about Bourne Island, well, we don't need a private company to operate this service. It should be part of the Coast Mountain Bus Company regular service. And the third item is the bus stop balancing, page 176 out of 182. The CEO can stop this program before he speaks on January the 5th, 2022, at the TransLink Unplugged podcast in the U.S. And this is another waste of money program by TransLink. It's already costed us over $1 million. And the other CBC Queen is against that. He had a radio program on CBC on November 30th. And will CEO Queen debate the issue with CBC Queen and see who is the winner. And I'm sure that CBC is the winner. But, he's a new CEO and he needs all the help we can give him. And I suggested that the CEOs of the big city come in and spend 6 months with him to show him the ropes. And that's how he's going to learn. He's not going to learn it by speaking to the mayors on Metro Vancouver. They're too busy to do anything about the transit system. But the CEOs, and maybe he could speak to the CEO of BC Hydro, Doug Allen, who was the interim CEO at TransLink in 2015, and he could help him out. So get the right help, please, and don't rely on staff who are not telling you the truth about our transit system. Thank you very much for your assistance and help, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nathan. And we'll now see if our last speaker is on Joe Kunstler. Are you there?
Unfortunately, I don't think he's been able to join.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the public delegations. I want to thank each one who came and took the time to bring issues to our attention, and I appreciate you doing that this morning. So we'll now just go back to the agenda, and we're on item 3, which is the CEO report. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. And let me just first start by thanking you, Tony, for your service as board chair. I also want to share a welcome to our new board chair, Lorraine Cunningham. All of us at TransLink are really looking forward to working with you, Lorraine, and having you serve as board chair. Of course, I was also glad to hear that Harj Dhaliwal has been reappointed for a second term, and a very warm welcome to Jennifer Chan and Harpinder Sandhu as well. Next slide, please. I'd like to just begin this morning by addressing the climate disaster facing our region and our role as a transportation authority. In only 5 short months, British Columbians have experienced some of the most catastrophic severe weather events that anyone has ever experienced in their lifetime. And now we're all hearing the warnings from scientists who are linking these extreme weather events to climate change. And from the heat domes this summer that tragically took hundreds of lives, to the tornado that touched down on UBC's Vancouver campus last month, and more recently, atmospheric rivers that have created widespread flooding, destroyed homes, unleashed landslides, displaced thousands of British Columbians, and destroyed billions of dollars in critical infrastructure, blocking access to supplies along key corridors that connect British Columbia to the rest of Canada. Given all that, it's no wonder that a climate emergency has surpassed COVID-19 as the top issue facing most Canadians. Of course, the way that we move has a really big impact on climate change. And at 35% of the region's total greenhouse gas emissions, transportation represents the single largest source of carbon emissions in Metro Vancouver. Yet TransLink and our operating companies' contributions to the region's total GHG emissions is only 2.7%. And we have a plan to quickly reduce these by 2030 and eliminate them completely by 2040. But climate action in transportation will really need to encompass more than our own actions within TransLink. If we want to collectively reduce our carbon footprint as a region, we need to focus on reducing vehicle use and moving to sustainable transportation, walking, cycling, and rolling for shorter distances, and public transit for longer distances. I took this message recently to business leaders 2 weeks ago during my keynote address to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, where I really appealed to leaders to be bold and to make sustainable transportation part of their own climate action plans, like subsidizing, say, employee compass cards instead of parking passes. As we head into the new year, I will be continuing to emphasize the importance of sustainable and greener transportation as a solution to the ongoing climate emergency. And on the climate disaster affecting many parts of the province, 2 weeks ago, we invited employees to donate to the Canadian Red Cross flood and extreme weather, making an appeal in support of recovery and relief efforts in affected areas. And in an overwhelming show of support, our appeal has now surpassed $27,000. And I want to commend our employees for really coming together to support those in need during this difficult time. I think our collective efforts can uplift communities, as we really saw throughout the pandemic and now in the aftermath of some very extreme weather events. Next slide, please. Switching over to ridership. Every month since May, we've seen an increase in ridership, and October was no exception, having the highest ridership of any month since the pandemic began. And not only is ridership continuing to grow, but October ridership actually exceeded our budget expectations. Our October journeys were 12.7% above the 2021 budgeted journeys for the month. In general, TransLink's recovery is high compared to American and Canadian peers. And as of the end of October, New York City's MTA and TransLink are the first two North American transit systems to reach 60% of system ridership recovery. Throughout the fall, we've seen ridership spike on days when events are happening around Metro Vancouver, like C-Bus ridership during the Shipyards Festival, or SkyTrain ridership on Canucks home game nights, or system-wide ridership on Halloween weekend. And what this tells us is that people are choosing transit when they have somewhere to go. Next slide, please. This also signals to us that our new ridership incentive program, Tap In to Win Sweepstakes, is bringing excitement back to transit. As you know, we launched our first ever TransLink sweepstakes on November 1st. And for each journey a customer takes using their registered Compass card, they're entered into a monthly draw for great prizes. And it's been just a tremendous kickoff. In only 1 month, we've seen more than 30,000 customer registrations, far surpassing our most ambitious targets. And while it's impossible to calculate exactly how many new customers have chosen transit because of this incentive program, we do know that it's been an innovative way to build excitement about riding transit. And the draw for the first round of prizes happens this week. Next slide, please. I'd like to now transition to our financial position as we head into 2022. And as you've heard me say before, I am optimistic about ridership recovery in the months ahead. But that said, I am also a realist. We've been operating at nearly 100% of pre-COVID service levels throughout the pandemic, despite only reaching 60% of pre-pandemic ridership at the height of our recovery. Provincial and federal government relief funding has cushioned us to avoid layoffs and to continue operating at full capacity. With 2022 ridership projections expected at 60 to 80% of pre-COVID levels, TransLink is projecting a $46.9 million deficit for 2022. We've reduced what would have been a much higher shortfall in 22 by using remaining safe restart funding and drawing on cash in our reserves. I expect that shortfall to be similar in 2023 without an extension of safe restart funding. So we're going to continue to work toward achieving financial stability for the long run. And as part of that work, I do want to note that we're continuing to have good discussions with the province, working with them on additional federal operating relief and a real sustainable funding strategy for the next investment plan. In recognition of the fact that we have been providing far more capacity on some routes than ridership can justify, starting January 3rd, TransLink will be adjusting some bus service to more closely match its service with ridership demand. Making small bus service adjustments, which is something we've done since the beginning of the pandemic, will also help us manage costs over the next year. We'll be reducing frequency on a small number of routes with lower ridership while protecting the busiest routes. On those small number of routes, what our customers may experience is that instead of a bus arriving, say, every 7 minutes now, it will arrive every 8 to 10 minutes at times when ridership on that route is lower. A full list of winter service changes will be available in the coming weeks on our customer-facing communication channels. I also want to note that we are absolutely going to be responsive to any customer concerns we receive and do our best to modify service within our resources to meet those concerns. I want to be clear, though, that this bus service right sizing leaves 98% of bus service completely untouched. TransLink and CNBC are committed to managing this and really minimizing impact to our customers. I also want to emphasize that there will be no changes to SkyTrain or to C-bus service frequencies. Next slide, please. I would also be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity today to recognize Jeff Cross, our Vice President of Transportation Planning Policy, who will be departing at the end of this year. Jeff has been a regular here at our public board meetings as well as at the Mayor's Council, and I know that his work and his voice is so respected by everyone on the TransLink board and on the Mayor's Council. And so on behalf of all of us at TransLink, I do want to thank Jeff Cross for his tremendous commitment to public service and to improving transportation in Metro Vancouver for generations to come. So thank you, Jeff. Next slide, please. With that, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions from members of the board. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm just going to wait to see if there's any questions for you. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Again, thank you for your presentation. We'll move on to the next item in the agenda, which is a report from Michelle Ladrac, President General Manager of BC Rapid Transit Company. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And from BCRTC, all the best wishes once you have handed over the gavel to Lorraine. Next slide, please. So normally I skip over this slide, but I would really like to reinforce the key message of BCRTC. When I just arrived, I said, for me, it's all about safety, people, and performance, and actually in that right order. Because without safety, we don't have the right people, and without the right people, we don't have a smooth railway. And we hope to achieve this by doing better every day. And we have our challenges. But we always look at it with optimism. And we look at our processes and we look at how we lead our people and we look at how we work together in the hope that we will do better. And our focus is always on moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is probably the key slide for our safety initiative. As you can see, I'm wearing a new badge, this time not the TransLink badge, but the Zero Harm badge that we have introduced here as a policy at BCRTC. And it's paid off already, which you will see in the next two slides. So we again passed successfully our yearly core audit, and we made some steep improvements as well. So as you might know, is that the threshold is 80%, but in this case we actually managed operational health and safety, occupational health and safety to lift it up to 91%. And for documentation, we actually achieved 100%, and that's probably the first time in my entire career that I achieve such a score. But our focus will always be on zero harm, right? Because that's what drives us. It's not about these numbers are giving us confidence that we're heading in the right direction, but that's not why we're doing it, because we're doing it only to keep people safe and make sure that they can go to their families and friends unhurt and uninjured. Next slide, please. And we have a lot of KPIs within BCRTC, and I think across the enterprise. But for me, this is the key one. If I look at safety, I always look at LTIs, lost time injuries. And what we see here is that over the last 5 years, we've shown an almost 40% improvement. And this year is probably the lowest we have seen in many, many quarters, right? We still have things that go on, but and sometimes I think, why is this now necessary, right? So it just proves that we have to stay vigilant. To give you an example, the other day somebody cut himself because he took off his glove, and that could be so preventable. So our focus is continuously on keeping people safe, even if it's minor injuries. But this shows that we're making good progress. And we've also introduced Safe Start. And Safe Start is a human factors approach, where we don't only look at our processes and the way we lead on safety, but also look at what happens to people, what human factors are in play that make people get distracted and hurt themselves. And that has just been started for the power and plant staff that work for BCRTC, and the aim is to roll it out across the entire business in the next in the coming years. Next slide, please. It may surprise you, but this year is one of the best years that we've ever had in BCRTC's history. As you can see, January was actually a good month, but we had the heat dome in June and July, and that suppressed our performance a little bit. But overall, we're well above the 96.5% that we have set ourselves. And I think that's an international standard that we should be proud of. On-time performance is our key focus, because on-time performance instills trust with our customer, and it's the best way to convince them that that SkyTrain is a good product to use and to convince them to come back. So really proud of this. Unfortunately, we still have a number of incidents over 30 minutes, and they're higher than I'd liked. So if you look at our delays between 15 and 30 minutes, we're doing better than last year and the year before. But when you look at the number of incidents above 30 minutes, we seem to have a number of larger incidents that haven't helped us. So we had a police incident at Metro Town, we had flooding in Columbia Tunnel, we had more trespassers than normally, and we also had a number of medical emergencies. We're on top of it. Some of it is out of our control, but I'm never willing to accept that things that are outside of control, that those are things that we can't influence. So our focus will be and stay always on-time performance. Next slide, please. And then winter preparedness. I won't go through the whole list. Although we didn't have a very harsh winter this year, I think we had a big wind in the first year I arrived. And we made mistakes at the time, and we don't want to make those again. So what we did is we harnessed all the information we had within the business to make sure that our winter readiness plan is up to date, is detailed enough to make sure that we can cope with any kind of situation, that we have the staffing levels to step in and step up from the moment that we give go, and to make sure that people work together. I think above all, this is apart from all the process and the technologies, this is very much about coordinating all our actions to make sure that we do the best thing at the right moment and keep our trains going. It will always be a reduced service. That's just because of our system, but hopefully it will be a very reliable service and give people confidence. In the meantime, we encourage all our customers that when we do have winter weather or heavy rainfall, that they stay safe, that they take care, wear the right shoes, and make sure that they can use our system safely. Next slide, please. Now, this is probably where it gets very exciting, because this is how we maintain a state of good repair, but also how we look at the future. And you see here two pictures. One of those pictures, I think the top picture, is our new uninterrupted power supply that we have installed, which guarantees that if we are out of power, that we can continue running SkyTrain. And the lower one is an upgrade of our power supply in general. And that's part of the McNeil program, and that's now finished in that area. But we did more. At OMC 1, We started with the concrete pour of our new facility that's needed to allow 5-car trains in that will come in from 2023. At OMC4, we have started with the demolishing of the buildings that are still there, and the site is being prepped for the further upgrade of OMC4 and the build of OMC4. At OCC2, we were struggling with building permits, but it seems that these are now all in place or will be in place very shortly, and that will give us a new operating control center. At the same time, we continue with replacing the escalators on the Expo Millennium lines. As you may know, we have many that are close to 35 years old, and they are now being replaced. In the meantime, we also are very aware that some of them might sometimes be longer out of service than we had hoped, and that's probably only a parts issue, or mostly a parts issue. Some of those parts have to be manufactured individually because they're no longer available, and that's in itself is an interesting challenge. Having said that, availability is still around 95% and 97% for elevators. So we're doing our best, but apologies for those circumstances where we see an escalator that might not be in service as soon as we had hoped. Next slide, please. Oh, and what I almost forget to say about the other one is we also replaced a number of switches in our yard that had been in service for more than 35 years. And that shows you how forgiving our system has been, but it also shows you that that we have to constantly look at where to renew and to prioritize how we renew to make sure that we maintain a reliable service. Last time I got a few questions around quality management, and the question was, what are you doing about it, and are you making progress? And we're making good progress, right? So I established a quality management department for the sole reason to make sure that what we do today will be maintained in future, and that we learn from the past and that we implement those lessons learned. So we've now established a quality control center of excellence. We've hired dedicated resources. We're developing competencies, so to make sure that the next generation has the same knowledge and expertise as the current generation. We're updating job descriptions, and we've implemented an advisory committee to make sure that all our paperwork is properly recorded and that we have transparent access. And that's important because PCRTC started 35 years ago as a completely new innovation. And along the way, we've gathered a lot of paperwork, but we're also expanding. And it's very important that we keep all those documents in place, up to date and accurate, so that our job in the future in maintaining our system is a lot easier than it is today. Next slide, please. Then very excitingly, we now have a mock-up of the new Mark V train. It's in our OMC2. With our colleagues of TransLink, we organized a meeting with the press, and I think it had a positive coverage. What you will see in this train is that we have new information displays that are more accurate, easier to read, and generally give better info. We have more availability for people with reduced mobility, and we have better tools to park a bike or mobility scooters. So overall, more flex space on end cars, more room for bikes, better access for wheelchairs, and enhanced digital wayfinding. It's exciting because this is the future of SkyTrain, and hopefully it will even attract more customers. And I know from my own experience that new trains always attract more customers. So this actually helps us in our future. And then finally, next slide, please. Today is a very special day because today is the 5th anniversary. Today exactly is the 5th anniversary of the Evergreen Extension. And some said to me that they couldn't believe that it was already the 5th year. And as you can see, I think it did a tremendously good thing for municipalities of Burnaby, Port Moody, and Coquitlam. We have some interesting art from artists from Tri-Cities. We have some fabulously new stations that actually still look very high-end and modern and new. But above all, the Evergreen Extension attracted more than 40 million passengers in the last 5 years. So in that sense, it's been an enormous success. And for West Coast Express passengers, they've since 5 years, they've got better access to our buses and to our SkyTrain because of the Port Moody interchange. It wasn't an easy task at the time. We've learned our lessons. We learned about how to tie it in with Low Each Station. we gained experience with boring tunnels, the longest tunnel we currently have. And overall, I think it was a great success and something that encourages us to do much better and achieve the same results with once we get SLS and BSP. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my presentation for today.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for reminding us about the 5-year anniversary, because we need to celebrate these successes. So a number of questions for you. I'll start with Marcella first.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you for your excellent report, Michelle. I'm really, really pleased to see progress on many of your actions, particularly around safety. I have a question on the issue, it's not an issue, but 12 years and under boarding the train. Have you had any experiences with safety issues or anything like that, or has it just gone ahead smoothly?
I think I can confirm that it's gone ahead smoothly. We know that at this moment, they can only travel with an adult, right? Because they don't have the passes yet to swipe themselves on board. And I think that has been a situation that kind of helped us in this game. But so far, I've heard no particular complaints from the manager or from the STAs who work on our stations on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you, Marcella. Andy?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Two things. First, I was fortunate enough to have a viewing of the new Mark V trains that you mentioned in your report, and had an opportunity to talk to some of our advisory group users. And I agree with you. It was very positively received. And I look forward to the day we see them actually running. The question I have for you, Michelle, is something in your written report which we've addressed in the past, but I think it's worthwhile touching again, and that's on the rail grinding.
Yes.
Specifically, I know with the heat dome we had to cut back, but there was a couple of areas in Vancouver and New West that were issues previously. I was just wondering if you could update us on the status of both the complaints in those areas and the ongoing rail grinding progress.
Well, I checked this morning and I can tell you that we had no complaints in October and November around grinding. Actually, we received 2 commendations for the way we responded. So far, so good. Now, I must say that the weather helps, because wet weather always helps with the sound and the squeezing and what have you, squeaking and what have you. So far, so good. We continue doing what we're doing. So we keep responding to complaints immediately by going on site ourselves, doing measurements and getting crews out within the week often to help reduce any noise pollution, right? Often it takes a little bit of, after we've done it, often takes a couple of days, up to a week, 2 weeks, to smooth it all out, as I understand it. But so far, so good. No complaints in October and November.
Good to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Harj?
Thank you, Tony. Michelle, thank you for the excellent report. I just want to go back to your core audit, and 91% is an excellent score. So congratulations on that. And I'm just wondering, where in the audit did we find some room for improvement? So how do we get our 91 up to a higher number? Was there any specific areas that we were not quite up to snuff on, or was it more across different categories?
I think it was a little bit of everything. They asked us to improve on our return to work program, mainly because, not because we're lacking a return to work program, but because people don't seem to know about what we've been doing and what we're still doing to get people back to work. So that's an area of attention. They also had some recommendations around people working from home. And we've just introduced that policy right now and refreshed people's memories around working from home. And that's a new area for them. And those were probably the 2 key areas where they asked us to look into improvements. There's probably several more, but those were probably the 2 key items.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Harj. So I don't see any other hands right now. So Michelle, thank you for your report. And we'll move on to the next item in the agenda, which is a report from Mike McDaniel, who's our president and general manager of the Coast Mountain Bus Company. So good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Tony. Thank you, and congratulations, Tony, on 4 years of leadership with with chairing the TransLink board. And we look forward to welcoming Lorraine on officially too. But thank you very much. And I'm happy to bring the president's report here for you today. Next slide, please. So you see the agenda in front of you there. I'll just do a brief update on COVID-19, primarily around cleaning, a few weather updates given what's happened over the last while. One on Handy Dart operations and ending with a somber note on our people. Next slide, please. So to start, you see it in front of you there, just a couple of updates. We are happy that we have started phase 2 of the copper project that started in September. It will run for about a year following the success of phase 1. And it'll actually be on 3 different copper products on 3 different buses and a few SkyTrain cars as well. And we'll monitor the progress on that project. Also for our cleaning, we've modified some of our regiment just a couple of months ago. And what it will mean is more frequent daily cleaning as well as more frequent deep cleaning to make sure that our buses are even cleaner than before. So just some changes there on COVID-19 cleaning procedures. Next slide, please. Now, as mentioned in Kevin's report at the beginning, we obviously are affected by a lot of different climate incidents. And on the weekend of November 6 and 7, there was a tornado that did hit ground right around UBC and primarily on University Boulevard. You see the images on your screen there. It was devastating, our worst windstorm since 2006. And we lost 1 pole, 28 mast arms, and 150 meters of contact wire that needed replacing. So pretty devastating. That said, kudos to our transit operators that handled the diversions very quickly, along with our transit supervisors, and a special thank you to our trolley overhead crews that pulled a lot of hours over a couple very busy days and got the system back up and running, along with other stakeholders that were involved in that cleanup. We are, as also mentioned, monitoring, of course, what we're all seeing now with the flooding over the last number of weeks and in the days to come. We are monitoring primarily route diversions as well as supply chain issues, but pleased to report that supply chain issues on fuel and parts have so far been worked around. We have done some diversions in terms of where our suppliers are going through and getting to us. So at this point in time, no issues, but it is obviously an evolving situation and we will continue to monitor it day by day. But so far, so good. Next slide, please. Now, this is kind of the time period where we normally get ready for snow. And if you have looked at the forecast lately, that may be coming sooner than we would like. But we are ready. We have done all of our preparations for our snow desk, which we put up in our TCOM, our Transit Communications Center. We moved one of our CI staff, our customer information staff there to make sure that any diversions that we're doing on snow days, our customers hear about quickly as possible. We, of course, have worked with the municipalities already on priority routes for snow clearing. And as we initiated a couple of years back now, snow socks on our Burnaby Mountain and North Shore routes. We're also doing a route out at UBC from Alma into the university with snow socks this year as well. And de-icing for our trolley overhead routes when needed. And likely that will be coming up in a few days even. For Handy Dart, the team at First Transit does the inspection of all the routes in the morning. They obviously travel on not fixed routes, but all over side streets. So they have to make sure that they're safe. And on those snow days, we will have 2 staff, First Transit staff on each vehicle to make sure they're safe as well as the customers are safe. So we're ready for the coming days. Next slide, please. And just something else on Handy Dart. We did cross the Milestone barrier here on October 1st, where Compass on all Handy Dart vehicles as well as age-based discounts went into effect and was well received and has gone very smoothly. You heard about some ridership earlier. Our ridership for Handy Dart is around 44% to the end of September. But given that we have still capacity on the fleet, we are making sure that physical distancing is still up. Most of our routes, most of our trips are delivered with only 2 people on the vehicle at a time. But we've got lots of capacity to grow as the day programs continue to come back. I would be remiss here too if I didn't say thank you to our outgoing Director of Access Transit Service Delivery, Kathy Pereira. She's worked for us for 12 years, 3.5 of which she led as our director here in tireless efforts to make sure that the Handy Dart product on the roads for our customers was as good as it can be. And a big thank you to Kathy for all of her passion and hard work that went into doing that over the last 3.5 years. Next slide, please. And just a couple of things on operations here. We did a move, which we do at times. This one was a little bit bigger. We consolidated our shuttle fleet from Surrey Transit Center over to Hamilton Transit Center. This was to give a little bit more space in Surrey for the increasing demand in that part of the region for bigger buses. And we moved 34 shuttles over from Surrey to Hamilton on one night on September 6th, and our crews did that very smoothly. And so now the bus depots that have our shuttles are Hamilton, as mentioned, and Port Coquitlam Transit Center. And that'll give a bit more space for bigger buses out in Surrey for the evolving demand there. And I also wanted to mention, coincidentally, it is also Hamilton Transit Center's 5th year anniversary just over the last few months. It seems like yesterday, and kudos to the team and congratulations for 5 successful years over at Hamilton. And next slide, please. Now, a somber note on our team, on our people. I was a little bit hesitant to bring this forward in a public meeting, but we did reach out to the family and got their blessing. And so I did want to bring Charanjit Parhar's memory to all of you. This is an operator that we lost at the end of September after a tragic accident. It has been a tough time for our entire team. We have supported each other. We have been there for each other. There was countless amount of people that went to both the funeral and the prayers that was held after Charanjit passed away. But we came together as a team and we supported each other, and our thoughts continue to go out to his family. It was a very challenging period, as I said, and I just want to make sure that all of our staff know that if they need help, they just need to reach out. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to report or happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike, for that report, and also for acknowledging and recognizing Charjit, and obviously our condolences go to his family and to all his team members there at Coast Mountain Bus Company. A few questions for you, Mike, so I'll turn to Andy.
Yeah, thanks for the report, Mike. I've got two aspects of your written report I wouldn't mind hearing your comments on. I noticed on page 2, when you talked about the fare revenue for Coast Mountain, we're talking at approximately 48% of pre-pandemic numbers. Maybe you can just explain for people who are listening why the fare revenue numbers and the ridership numbers are out of sync with each other.
Sure, Andy, good question. The quick answer really is that our mix of customers has changed a little bit in the report. So we don't have the spontaneity of people taking transit and paying cash. Most of our users are pretty foundational users of the transit system right now on actually throughout the entire system, but you see that on cash collection on bus. So most people are actually using their Compass cards and not necessarily paying cash. So that's the quick answer, and hopefully that answers your question.
I think it's useful because I think people think they're interchangeable, and just because the number have gone up doesn't necessarily mean revenues appropriate. My second point, if I may, is around the apprenticeship programs. It's a small item in your report, but I think it's an important one that We've seen an increase starting in this quarter. Everywhere across all industries are struggling for skilled trades right now. Do we foresee an expansion beyond these ones reported? And also with our transition to an electric-based fleet, we will see a requirement of a different skill set. I'm assuming that will give opportunities in the job market for people coming into electrical-based apprenticeships and skills trades. So I think this is a positive story and some opportunities for us to open up maybe apprenticeships in new areas that may attract a different cross-section of people looking for employment in the transit industry. I wouldn't mind hearing your comments on that, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It's such a great topic because, yes, you're right. Our ability to keep our trades fully staffed has been a challenge for a number of years now. It is this year as well. Our apprenticeship program has been quite a success story. That said, we're always looking to improve it as well. And we're actually, our teams are dialing into how to improve it, including expanding the numbers that are in it, because there are times where it is our major contributor to getting new skilled trades in to full-time positions is coming out of that apprentice program. But what you've also noted is the transition that we are getting ready for. We're not there yet, but as mentioned, of course, as part of our low carbon fleet strategy, our transition to an electric, battery electric bus fleet primarily is going to be transformational. And the amount of retraining and different types of training, different types of apprentice programs, different ways to recruit people across, even in female trades, that's a big push that we're going to be looking at as well. It offers us a lot of opportunity. It offers us a lot of things to figure out. And that is part of our planning for our low carbon fleet strategy. More to report in probably future meetings, but all parts are flagged and we're working on all of them as we speak. So good question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Larry?
Thank you. Mike, thank you for an excellent report and condolences to the organization and to the family for that tragic loss. My question really relates to the delegation we heard at the
Larry, I think Larry's frozen on my screen. Is he likewise on all the other screens?
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
he is.
Okay, well, why don't we maybe go to Marcella and see if Larry maybe can reconnect.
Thank you very much. Mike, as always, thank you for the excellent report and my condolences as well to the team and one of our operators. Is always a very tragic thing to happen. I have just a couple of questions. In your report, you comment on the wheelchair accessibility at 81.2%. Do you have a target to get to 100%?
Absolutely, we do. Yeah, and that's something we work with the municipalities on annually. And right now we're moving a little over 2% each year, but it's dependent on a lot of other things that we're doing as well relative to bus stops that sometimes move or part of our bus stop balancing. So there's a lot of other parts that are going on. But yes, our target, of course, is 100%. And we're obviously making progress towards that.
Okay, thanks. A second question, we talk about winter preparedness. Excellent. I was wondering whether or not all the water, I know the windstorms obviously have impact on falling trees, etc. Has the severe water had any severe direct or severe impact on operations? And if so, what would you be doing about that, if anything?
Well, so far, Marcella, the good answer, the quick answer is we have not had a significant effect so far to our service. There's been some diversions, but those happen kind of every day for a variety of reasons. Nothing material at this point in time, but we're always ready and have plans for flooding, quite extensive plans, relocation of operations, bus depots. We have alternate locations that we have a plan for. We have not had to get close to deploying those at this point in time. But as I said before, it is an evolving situation. And with the combination of rain as well as upcoming snow, that can cause a problem, and so we're watching that very closely.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. And just last, I want to commend you on your focus on mental health of your team. That is just so terribly important, obvious in this time. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Marcella. Karen?
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Mike, for your report. First of all, I want to say how distressed all of us were about the loss of a well-respected employee, and appreciate all of the work you've done in supporting people through that, and also in looking at the aspects that led to it. My question is about bus stop balancing, and I'm wondering if anecdotally you're hearing anything about changes in the way people are using the system. You mentioned spontaneity of using the bus, and I wonder if those two may be related, and if so, how you're monitoring that to see whether it's becoming, if one is perhaps leading to the other.
Well, I think we are obviously with some of the pilots on bus stop balancing, we are getting feedback from customers. We're also getting data relative to increases in speed of journeys as well. That is kind of the crux of the idea. What I would say is that Kevin pretty much nailed it off the top. We see that when people have a place to go and a reason to travel, a lot of them are choosing public transportation, and that's a great sign. We are seeing that as well. What we haven't quite rebuilt back is, the tourist market, a lot of things that happen in town that we're used to, and hence why some of the cash sales from revenues is down. But in terms of your question around bus stop balancing, it's really an ongoing project that we're gathering data on. So I'm not sure if we have enough information to draw conclusions from that. I know we are piloting a couple other routes again in January. The whole idea here is to increase the speed of the journey and the customer experience overall, and we'll see what that results in.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. It'll be interesting, and we look forward to updates on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. Larry, are you back?
I think I'm back, and I'm sorry about that connection problem. Quickly, my question before I get disconnected again is, where does the Handy Dart sit in our very aggressive electrification program?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. From the comments from one of the delegates, it was a good comment. Where we have to start from is exactly one of the points that was made is a real estate strategy. We currently do not own any of the sites that Handy Dart operates on. We do have for 2022 an action for exactly that, is to develop a more long-term real estate strategy. We simply know we cannot invest major charging infrastructure in a location that we are leasing for short periods of time. And that will be the precursor to the rest of the work on the vehicle side. I will say on the vehicle side, there is limited at this point in time, not none, but very limited options for that type of fleet in the battery electric world. Most of the advances in North America have been on the 40 foots and some on the 60 foots. We are seeing some in other fleet types like double deckers as well as shuttles coming on stream, but it is still very early days. I would kind of remind the board that for a conventional bus, a 40 footer, 60 footer, these are 17, 18, 19 year buses. For Handy Dart, they're around 7 years in terms of their cycle. So we have options in the near term to make moves on that, but we have to take care of the land planning first, and then move to the vehicle side of it. But it is part of our low carbon fleet strategy, and you'll see in the coming year here the rest of Route 100 get completed on the battery electric side, with 15 more vehicles coming to add to the 4 that we already have. And then, of course, Port Coquitlam Transit Center, we have 57 coming in the following year, which will be the biggest purchase and biggest move we've made so far, which we're very excited about, and plans are well underway for that.
Well, I do know that we have a pretty aggressive program. I think it would be useful over the next year to make clear what our strategy is on the Handy Dart electrification, even to the extent that that might extend out a few years. We have to 2030, but I think anyone would like to know exactly when we have that in mind and what we intend to do more explicitly. And I appreciate your comments there. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. So I don't see any other hands, Mike. So thank you for your report. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from Dave Jones, our Chief Officer with the Transit Police. So good morning, Dave.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And Tony, I'd be remiss if I also didn't thank you for your time and leadership over the last 4 years. And certainly, I hope that doesn't mean you won't be out there once a year at the golf tournament carrying me around with the best ball scores. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.
So this morning here, I'm pleased to report on our quarterly update here. Next slide. One of the first things I'd really like to introduce to you, and unfortunately she couldn't be here today, she's had some surgery, was we have recruited our next Deputy Chief Officer, which is Anita Furlan. Anita will be appointed on January the 4th, 2022. She will be coming in a bit early to overlap with Deputy Chief Cross, who is set to retire in the spring of next year. For some of you who may have known, Anita came to us from the RCMP about just over a year ago, and worked with us for a year on a secondment. She brings a wealth of experience and will actually be our first Deputy Chief Officer who's a female since the agency department was created. So we'll be welcoming her, and I'm sure you'll be seeing lots more of her, and hopefully at the next meeting she'll be able to introduce herself. Next slide. So one of the things that happens, and I just want to point out, is and you heard earlier from Michelle, was the Metrotown incident. And I speak to this in the manner in which the transit police are coordinated with so many different police agencies and in different communities and able to provide that assistance. The issue at Metrotown actually started with a call to the Metrotown SkyTrain station, was the initial call, subsequently to a call right inside the mall area. Because of the amount of interagency cooperation and training we were able to do, we were able to provide enough of a response to the Burnaby RCMP to be primarily their backup for that incident inside the mall. It took a lot of resources, but it was able to conclude itself in a safe manner. For those, who probably have followed along, it was a swatting call, which is, typically where somebody will, from hidden servers, make a call of a serious nature to deploy police resources in such a manner. We continue, because we received the call, which was initially to the SkyTrain station, to investigate that. And while we've been able to identify the location of it, unfortunately, as we would expect, it's from a location overseas, making it very difficult to follow up on. Next slide. I show this mainly because as we've been going through issues such as the pandemic, and we can never forget that we also have an ongoing opioid crisis that's been going on for 5 years, that the people around and both in their home lives and out in public are still continue to face lots of stresses on themselves. While we call mental health apprehensions or interdictions, as we should get into them, are on the rise. The reason this is important is because a lot of these happen because our officers are visible and on the system and able to locate people who appear to be in distress and to take steps and actions ahead of time, including taking them to a physician if so required. With the numbers up, it also is reflective, though, of the amount of attention and training we're putting into this area. It's something that we're concerned about, and it's something that we'll continue to focus on as a lot of pressures in today's just overall society carry on. Next slide. Along with that, I note one of the things for our members is that being visible on the system and getting engaged with people results in the question, our interactions, and usually through interactions we will find people who may be wanted. The reason I give this as a thing is that this number of 68% is actually, this number of 872 warrants is actually up 68% for the same period in 2020. It shows again that our members are engaged out there. Usually the arrests result in the identification of the person having a warrant for their arrest is because we're involved with them as a result of another call or incident for it. But it also is reflective of 2 new units that we've started. One I'll highlight here today. called the Crime Suppression Team. And last week, our last board meeting, I had introduced you to the Targeted Mobile Enforcement Team, which again almost targets problem areas or problem individuals, and it results in us being far more effective in what we're able to do. Next slide. So this month I've indicated the this would be the Crime Suppression Team, and you can tell that this team, which is dedicated to identifying problem areas or problem individuals within the system, which unfortunately we don't have a large amount of, but give us that opportunity. And when the Lower Mainland Regional Gang conflict was at its height in the spring, and it still carries on today, we were able to put this group together to make sure that the areas not only on our property, but immediately surrounding our property, and teaming up with the jurisdictional police agencies, we would focus to ensure that public safety was maintained. In other words, our goal is to make transit locations and transit hubs places of safety within a community. This is just an example of what this team has done over a period of time. Often, whether it be we have seized a number of imitation weapons and both weapons that are real and other items. Again, whether it be on view or somebody else pointing out someone's behavior, it shows the value of us being present and being accessible in a really easy manner, and working together with our jurisdictional partners to identify those who may be up to, I'll call it, nefarious actions in and around the system. Next slide. This is an update just on our Community Safety Officer program. We keep reporting on this. We've continued with the idea of I call it a tiered policing model. We have our application in before the government, the Community Safety Officer program, because many of you will see that it is meant to be a lower level, still well-trained individuals who will be able to provide support for lower tasks and priorities. We have now, we've been in the consultation phase. We have done the consultation with vulnerable sector groups and are now doing it with First Nations and Indigenous groups. The hope is that by the end of this year, pretty soon or very early in the year, the report will go to government recommending this, and hopefully a sign off in the spring with a kickoff in the fall of 2022. Next slide. Of course, not everything we do is about enforcement, and that we also strive. We have a very active and engaged community engagement team and neighborhood police officers. I just walk you through this because it was really important to us that we were able to get out into our communities. And the slide in the top left will show us that we have identified members, and I think we speak over 30 different languages with our members. And the top left was Constable Kyle Adamson, who was able, and we go out and deliver safety discussions to groups, students, seniors, and other groups, and we deliver it in their language, if you want to call it. So this is her delivering it in Cantonese. We've also delivered it in Pakistani to other groups as we continue to go out. The members are really eager to do this. This group on this day was overwhelmed with it. They were very appreciative, and I'm sure we'll be back and doing more of them. You'll also see that we're teaming up with ICBC and pedestrian safety on the top right. And again, looking at ways to engage groups that may use the transit system in the future. On the bottom right is actually a Girl Scouts group that we have reached out to here with Constable Jenny Chung. Jenny Chung has returned into the neighborhood policing offices and will work the Burnaby and Coquitlam areas, and is quite active with it. Next slide. We continue to strengthen the support working with Indigenous people. We're now 2 years into the action plan, and as many know, the Blue Eagle program was a big success, Blue Eagle Cadet program. This is designed for kids between the ages of about 12 and 15 to 12 to 16. To get them active and together within the community. I always want to stress with this that the Blue Eagle program is not just about introducing kids to policing and public safety. It's about reconnecting them with their culture and their traditions. Quite often it is led by Constable Kirk Rattray, who is First Nations, and both Cheryl Simpkin, but they bring in people and elders from within the community. This program is set to expand in 2022 We've applied for an application for funding to take it into Surrey now, in conjunction with the Surrey RCMP and Surrey Police Service, to actually double the size of the program and the activities that we do with the youth. We've also had the commitment statements made, and I would say the program has grown and has been one of our more successes and flagship successes here. Next slide. We continue with promotions, and I say retirements in this sense. We promoted a recent batch of supervisors. I just want to point out the one gentleman on the right there, Constable Julian Poncion. If you're familiar with Julian or follow any of our Twitter, he's quite active in the LGBTQ2S society. And I think I received, or he received, over 900 replies to his promotion, right? I don't think I got that many when I was promoted at any time in my career over the steps. So we're quite happy as much as it is. The group represents diversity in many different ways throughout the organization. And it was a first run of a new promotional process, which has actually led us to identify to develop our next layers as well too. So we were quite pleased with it. Next slide. Well, this comes to the end. I just also wanted to point out in the recent time here that the transit police are, as we were positioned through 22 different communities and that, are often called upon to do and support local police agencies or the jurisdictional police agencies with many different events and that. Of particular note, we have seen, of course, the increase in protests in the Vancouver area, special events firing up both at BC Place and Rogers Arena. We often respond, and we do plan to prepare to ensure that transit keeps moving. We're also always prepared to keep the system going, prepared to protect the assets when we know of large events or protests in the area. And I do want to put a thanks out to our members. When called upon here, we were able to readapt and provide assistance to the community of Abbotsford. I know it sits outside our transit region per se, but we were able to, over a 2-week period, provide urgent assistance with our members who stepped up to the plate and attended out there. Some of the job was not always exciting, but it was really important work that they were able to do. And with that, that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. That's a great report. A few questions for you. I'll start with Lorraine.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chief Jones, for your report. I noticed you didn't mention Kona's retirement there when you were talking about promotions and retirement. So I just wanted to point that out as a dog-friendly person. But I particularly just wanted to commend you on this work you're doing on the Community Safety Officer Program. I think that when that finally comes to fruition in 2022, it will be wonderful for TransLink because it'll provide us the opportunity to have more people out there to keep our system as safe as possible. And I just think that's a wonderful initiative. And I know we've been talking about it for at least 3 or 4 years now, if not more.
Yeah, it's been about 3 years. It's been a long process, but we see that it's moving forward and we're making that progress. So I'm really happy about it. And yes, I should have mentioned Kona. It's probably the most important. And so,
exactly.
Kona was set to retire within a year. Her handler was promoted. So what we do is, if people are concerned, is that we do, when the dog has reached kind of end of services, we allow them to stay with their handler at the end. We do a transfer so that the dog is kept happy. We worry about the dog first, handler second.
Very important.
Yeah.
So just as a follow-up question, Chief Jones, how many, once the approval's through on those safety officers, how many would you anticipate that would start in the early days? How are you planning on rolling this out?
Right. So the initial plan and concept was to have a total of 24. It was part of a 3-year pilot. Remember, we were trying to aim to do this and get it primarily completed before the Broadway lines opened or the Surrey Langley lines opened. We still think we'll be able to do that. Next year, our target would be to put 12 through in the fall, followed up by 12 through in the spring, because we'll have to we'll have to do the recruitment and the training. But what we've been doing is we've obviously developed the training package, the curriculum, getting it all approved. And at the same time, we've been identifying potential recruits into this thing. Some of them we will see will come from people who perhaps want to move on to a career in policing. So it'll be like a step to go through, and we'll be able to have our own kind of recruitment pool in this area. And there, of course, are others who will want to do this, want to deliver a program of safety, in a manner that isn't like becoming a full police officer. So there are career opportunities within it as well. So 24 is the number.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lorraine. So Dave, I don't see any other hands right now. So again, thank you for the report.
You're welcome. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see you next year out there. And you got this time to practice. Don't improve too much, because I still have to take 4 drives, right?
Yeah, no, that's a concern. I don't think you have to be too worried about improvement in golf. I think that never happens. So,
okay,
but
thank you very much.
So we'll move on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is a report from Sarah Clark, who's the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. Sarah?
Thank you, Tony. Our committee met on November 22nd of this month in preparation for the meeting today. Some of our primary focus, you'll see, as we know today in the agenda, is the approval of the 22 business plan operating capital budget. We had a number of sessions over the fall, one with the full board and several with the finance committee in preparing for this. The members of TransLink, as well as the subsidiary companies, have done a tremendous job in preparing this budget and plan for next year against all of the challenges that they've been facing over the past 18 months, and especially, well, even more accelerated in the last few months. So we thank everyone for the work that they did on this budget and the work that they've done in optimizing the operation of the company while still maintaining a tremendous level of service. We also in our committee meetings cover the safety of TransLink as well as the subsidiaries. And I think what you've heard today from the 3 reports that we've just received, how much the focus is on safety of the traveling public as well as our employees. And I want to just congratulate everyone on the tremendous strides that have been made in this area as well. With the focus on all aspects of that, there has been great improvement across the board. And while there's always more work to do in this, the momentum is looking very good. We also covered the status of the ERM system, which is which is underway, as well as had an update on the investment plan. We always cover the internal audit and continuous improvement program that is within TransLink, and got an update on the number of projects that are in the works being completed, and then actions that are followed up, which are, one of the most important part of these reports, as well as audits, the audit reports, and that the actions are followed through on. So I thank everyone for that as well, because it's obvious that everyone in the organization is committed to continuous improvement in many aspects of the business. Under the consent agenda, we covered the SkyTrain, the Surrey Langley SkyTrain update, Broadway subway update, and we also did cover off the condition of the existing Pattullo Bridge. So it was a fulsome meeting, excellent reports by all of the employees that participated in it. So we thank them very much for that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for that report. I don't see any questions for you, so I'm just going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from Larry Beasley with respect to the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee. Larry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go audio only on this, just hopefully to protect my connection. So I beg your pardon on that. We had a very fulsome meeting on November the 23rd. We were happy to have joining us Jennifer and Harpinder, who are visiting it, but will be members of the committee starting next year. And of course, Andrea is settled in very nicely now as a newer member of our committee as well. The first part of our meeting, we really dealt with the ridership recovery, and we were thrilled to see that we're closing in and now have closed in on 60% recovery of riderships. That's so important to us. The efforts both to collect the information has been important, but also the initiatives to entice and bring our riders back, very, very important as well. We then covered the Transport 2050 planning process. The last round of engagement was a very successful round. And what it did is it reached out to people that often are not a part of these engagement processes. And we were very happy to see that. And we're now very happy to see that the whole process is coming to a conclusion with a plan, a draft plan of very unbelievably high public support right across all kinds of interest in the public, and looking forward to seeing that one brought forward in January for the board and mayor's council consideration. We then dealt with how we identify new plans and studies for future expansions and the logical process that's put in place for that. And then we went right from that to looking at the situation with the UBCX, the extension out to UBC, and how that has been following through with this framework, this plans and studies framework. We then looked at the 2022-23 TransLink corporate and board work planning process and key initiatives. All the different committees are looking at this. We did our contribution in that conversation. We then looked at the supportive policy agreements with Langley City and Langley Township related to the extension out there, and those negotiations and discussions are going on very, very well. And then we spent some time on the Indigenous Relations Quarterly Update, and particularly the discussion about transit service of First Nations reserves. I think we made it clear as a committee that this should be a very high priority, that this sort of almost by accident institutional discrimination on transit access needs to be dealt with as a high priority. And we do see that moving forward with the staff's support and interest in that. We had a great conversation about the Customer Experience Action Plan, new initiatives. You heard one of them today, the sweepstakes, but there are other great new initiatives coming forward to really build and support and expand the quality of our customer experience. We then had 11 items on our consent agenda. We made appointments to the Handy Dart Advisory Committee and Access Transit User Advisory Committee, and we dealt with a number of other aspects on that, a good discussion. And then we closed off by celebrating to a great degree the contribution of Jeff Cross. We've already heard of that from the CEO, but we really felt his involvement with us over the last few years has been just among the best that we've seen. And I personally will say, as a planner, a city planner, among the best professional work I've ever seen, really complimenting him. And I'm happy, since this was my last meeting, to hand over the baton for new chairing of this committee to Mayor Jonathan Cote, who will take the reins for this in 2022. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Larry. I don't see any questions for you on that report, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from Marcella Zezel with respect to the Human Resources and Governance Committee meeting. Marcella?
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate that. So the HR and Governance Committee met on November 23rd, and I'll first address the HR issues that we discussed. I do like to remind us all the time that the quarterly report and the planning under the HR perspective is always under 3 strategic objectives. First, building a strong foundation. Second, putting people first. And third, investing in the future. So all of our discussion falls under those categories. Now, list some of the key areas that we talked about. We looked at staffing, we looked at turnover. We talked about the great resignation that we all read about in the newspaper and how that is impacting TransLink, the implications for that for both the retention and the attraction of new employees within the entire organization. We looked at leadership in the organization, programs that are being developed, many of them with external expertise, such as a partnership with the Sauder School of Business. And we then spoke a lot about how new approaches to attracting new talent in the given environment that we have. We then talked about the significant amount of energy that's being put into safety at TransLink across the enterprise. And I think we heard a lot about it from our three leaders of the organization, and we see a lot of it reflected in the budget. So that's a very important thing that we keep focused on. We had a detailed report on the return to work and future of work. Some employees have slowly been returning to work, and always with clear safety protocols in place in the buildings, and that has been occurring since October. So the first phase of the future of work begins on January 10th, actually, 2022. So in this context, there was a huge focus on the safety, on continuity, on service and operational considerations, which are affecting the cadence and frequency of those who are returning to the Sapperton building. There was a lot of issues raised by the committee that we discussed, such as productivity, engagement, culture, technical support that's required, and all of these are being addressed, and the committee discussed them at length. We then turned to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and heard a report on the progress. There was a focused discussion on new recruiting processes, training, and there was an effort around promoting women, particularly within the operating trades. We have reported on this before, and the plans and actions are getting much more robust, and we're really pleased with it. Once again, in this area, TransLink is teaming up with others, experts in the areas, for instance, Minerva, on leadership training for younger people. One of the key things that HR has spearheaded relating to all of the workplace challenges and the challenges we all have in our lives, which is the development of a psychological health and safety policy. This is intended to deal with the needs of employees who are experiencing great changes in the workplace and outside the workplace. There was a policy that was presented to us, and the committee endorsed that policy. The policy is not required to be approved by the board, and it's available for you to look at online. So I'll turn to governance for a moment. Like the other committees, we reviewed our work planning processes. We then looked at the report from the corporate secretary on progress recruiting 2 new directors to the subsidiary boards. And we approved the exciting and sad new committee structure for 2022. Tony has outlined all the changes. We've referred to some of the new committee members and old members leaving, and with that, we approved a very long list, probably the longest list in my years on TransLink of changes to the board. So we did approve the committee structures for approval, for board approval. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you wish to call for a question on approval of the 2022 committee structure at this time.
I can do that. Yeah, if you're, I think it's in the consent agenda. Maybe it's not.
It's actually not brought forward to the public meeting.
Sorry?
Sorry, Jennifer.
Sorry, it's not brought forward to the public meeting. It's brought forward to the in-camera meeting later today.
Okay, so we'll deal with it later on then. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, any questions for Marcella? I don't see any, so thank you, Marcella, for your report. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, 10, which is our 2022 business plan, operating and capital budget. I'm going to turn the floor to Chris Dacre, who's our CFO. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Tony. Thank you very much. Next slide. So throughout the pandemic, TransLink has continued to deliver the region's essential public transportation services while maintaining the assets in a state of good repair. The $661 million of senior government relief funding we received covered our net losses for 2020 and 2021. Through the budget reductions, service adjustments, and expansion plans put on hold, we saved $270 million over the 2 years. And we recalibrated our capital program during the most uncertain times of the pandemic. Next slide. This slide shows our ridership recovery since the start of the pandemic, when our ridership was at its lowest in April 2020 at 17% of pre-COVID levels. The blue shaded area is the weekly new COVID cases in BC, and the orange line shows the percentage of eligible Metro Vancouver residents that are fully vaccinated, which is over 90%. The black line is our weekly ridership numbers, and you can see they have been on a fairly steady incline since May. And in November, we hit 60% of pre-COVID levels. Next slide. Our ridership projections for 2022 include low, medium, and high demand scenarios. This graph shows the number of journeys as a percentage of pre-COVID levels. The black line is the actuals up to November, and the blue line, which is the medium demand scenario, is what our 2022 budget is based on. It assumes ridership levels will begin the year at around 64% and will end the year at 82% of pre-COVID levels. The high demand scenario takes ridership to 92%, and the low scenario takes it to 69%, just for comparative purposes. Next slide. Our transit service is a key factor in the region's post-pandemic social and economic recovery. As you have seen, the level and speed of ridership recovery remains uncertain, and the fare revenues continue to be diminished relative to pre-pandemic levels. It was important for us to set a level of spending that is financially sustainable and provides a platform on which to base future recovery, which will require additional funding. Next slide. A number of challenges and risks identified in this budget include continued effects of the pandemic as it impacts our ridership and associated revenue, cybersecurity risk from current global threat patterns, attraction and retention of a skilled and resilient workforce, supply chain shortages and delays, fuel price escalation, maintaining a state of good repair on our aging infrastructure, and possible labor disruptions during a collective bargaining year. Next slide. The 2022 corporate priorities continue to be those established in 2021. We are focusing on providing reliable mobility for as many people as possible within our reduced financial capacity. The 4 priorities are: rebuild customer ridership, foster a safe, skilled, and resilient workforce, deliver a reliable transportation system in a state of good repair, and achieve financial sustainability. We are working with the mayors and the province on developing tools to close the revenue gap. Next slide. TransLink is employing a fiscally prudent approach to deliver services that are tailored to the needs of the region while advancing the organization's strategic priorities. Service levels are right-sized to demand. Investments in priority areas include Indigenous relations, ridership recovery, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and information technology. The capital program continues to prioritize the state of good repair, and this budget forms a baseline from which our next 10-year investment plan can build on. Next slide. TransLink's budgeted revenue for 2022 is just under $2 billion. It reflects a positive outlook for the region's economy and travel activity, translating into higher operating and taxation revenues. Excluding the senior government funding that was budgeted in 2021, our 2022 revenues are 296 million higher than the 2021 budget due to increased ridership projections as well as fuel tax, parking tax, and property taxes. The 2 billion consolidated revenue is broken down as 47% from taxation, 31% from transit revenues, 16% from government transfers for contributions to capital projects, as well as replacement revenue from the Golden Ears Bridge tolling that was removed in 2017, and 6% from other revenues like investment income, development, cost charges, and recoveries. Next slide. Expenditures from continuing operations before amortization is 51 million, or 3% higher than the 2021 budget. Efficiencies and reductions were made in non-critical areas in order to fund the key initiatives. By identifying and proceeding with only those expenditures which are absolutely necessary to strengthen our contribution to the region, TransLink is freeing up the capacity to invest in areas which are central to our priorities. Next slide. Our key initiatives include implementing the ridership recovery campaign, increasing the maintenance and quality management programs at BCRTC, information technology investments, Indigenous relations framework, plans for the adoption of a new regional transportation strategy, development of a new mayor's vision, and subsequent investment plans, and making the Safe Operations Action Program a part of our ongoing operations. Next slide. The 2 billion consolidated expense budget is broken into segments shown on this slide. 43%, or 864 million, goes to bus operations. 375 million for rail operations. Transit police is 46 million, and 125 million for corporate operations. The roads and bridges section is 140 million, and this includes 95 million as capital infrastructure contributions to municipalities. And the remainder is for amortization, interest, and one-time expenses. Next slide. The 2022 new capital program of $1 billion includes 282 million related to state of good repair. Included here are the end-of-life fleet replacements and various end-of-life infrastructure replacements. 538 million for committed expansion projects, and some of these include the new Marpole Transit Center facility and facility upgrades to accommodate our expansion. 100 million for the municipal cost share programs, and 100 million for business improvements and resiliency projects. The detailed list of all capital projects is included in the 2022 business plan document. And I'll just mention that 400 million of this capital program is funded through senior government funding. Next slide. The impact of this budget on our financial indicators is that they all remain within our policy limits. At the end of 2022, our projected gross debt will be 4 billion, which is below our policy limit of 5.5 billion. As you can see on the slide, our net debt to capita, net debt to operating revenue, and gross interest to operating revenues are all within our policy limits. We are projected to end the year with 483 million in accumulated funding resources, which is our unrestricted cash and investments. This is well within the policy, but I will mention that our decline in revenues without additional funding, and depending how fast we restore our ridership, this will decrease substantially over the next couple of years. And next slide. So in summary, this budget maintains appropriate service levels, ensuring the organization is positioned to support the region's recovery. Service levels have been right-sized to demand. The 2022 fare increase is limited to an average of 2.3% to promote affordability for our customers. The unrestricted cash and investments are expected to decrease by 124 million, but it is still within our policy limits. The capital program is focused on state of good repair and key projects to the region. And this budget forms the foundation for the 2022 10-year investment plan. And we continue to work with the province to seek additional federal emergency relief funding, as we will not be able to maintain this level of service in the coming years without additional funding. Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Tony.
Great, thank you, Chris. So I'll just remind the board that we did have a workshop with the whole board where we got a chance to sort of provide our input, and then the Audit and Finance Committee has subsequently had a number of other meetings to address hopefully all the board's comments and issues, and that they are reflected in the current budget that we have here today. So I'm just looking to see if there's any additional questions. Lorraine?
Thank you. And sorry, Chris, for more questions. But in one of your slides, you were talking about fuel tax increasing by 3%. With all the climate issues that are going on and the cry for more electrification of our fleet and the vehicle fleet that's out on the roads, when do you see that starting to decline in your future planning? Because I don't recall that number.
Yeah. So that fuel tax revenue is the 3% increases up from the budget. And mainly that's due to just the COVID with the driving restrictions or activity, people working from home, that kind of thing. The decline from the zero emissions vehicles, that absolutely will be a huge part of our funding that we'll need to look at a replacement funding for. We probably see that really, it has started actually, but not to a great deal, and it will get more and more, it'll have more and more impact to us in the next couple of years and then onward. But this 3% increase is more due to the difference because of the restrictions and people working from home and stuff.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work that you and your team have done to put this budget together. I know it's not the easiest of times to come forward with a budget. And I think it's so important that we keep this organization viable and healthy so that we continue to have the ability to deliver our service.
Thank you. Karen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I too echo Lorraine's comments of the work that's gone into this. As Tony mentioned, we've looked at it at both the board and committee level in a lot of detail, and you've guided us through a lot of the decision making. Having said that, the environment out there is a bit of a moving target. And I wondered, Chris, if you could share with us, in addition to, I guess, ridership being the big question mark, I wondered if there are any other big key indicators that you're monitoring at present as we go into sort of the next phase of our environment.
Yeah, well, I mean, fuel tax is one, and Lorraine did bring it up with the move to the zero emissions. Parking tax revenue also, although we see those three revenue sources, although we see them increase from the 2021 budget, they're still lower than pre-pandemic levels. So all three of those continue to be a concern to us, and that we're monitoring to see how quickly we'll recover from that. On the other challenges and risk side that's not revenue related, kind of touched on it a bit, and it was mentioned, Marcella mentioned it from the HR committee, attraction and retention of our workforce. We're no different than any other organization, and we continue to look at the patterns that are there, and how we can make sure that we do retain our employees.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. So we do have a resolution which approves the operating and capital budget. It's attached to the report, which is dated November 8th, 2021. So can I have someone move that? Move that?
Moved.
And seconded?
I'll second that, Marcella.
Okay, Marcella second, Andy moved it, and then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's great. So that's passed unanimously. Again, Chris, thank you to you and to your team. I know this is a lot of work to put this together, but it's important work. And I think, as Lorraine mentioned, I think it bodes us well in terms of going forward, knowing that we have a solid capital and a financial plan. So thank you. So we'll move on to item 11 in the agenda, which is a report from Jeff Cross on our plans and studies framework. So good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Tony, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the kind words. And before I just launch into this, I do want to say, being in this position, obviously, it's an honor, and any kind words you're transmitting towards me is just a result of the great work that my team or the teams across the enterprise are doing. I just end up being the spokesperson for that. So hopefully I'm doing it justice, which has been a humbling experience for me for the last 13 years. So launching into this, we've got a report that's just for information for you on our plans and framework. Larry pointed to this earlier. Just a couple of key points, and then maybe open it up for any questions from the board. We felt this is very important at this point in light of where we're at with both Transport 2050, the development of the new vision, and then a number of studies that are either in progress or about to commence coming out of those two major study activities, to be very clear about what the framework is for how a project goes from initiation of identification and a strategy through the development stages to potential implementation. The Transport 2050 strategy, which will be brought forward for potential approval in January, identified a new reliable and fast network map, of which most of those corridors are new. There are only a couple remaining from our last regional transportation strategy and Mayor's vision. So it brings to bear a whole new slate of potential corridors for identification. We want to be very clear, both with our municipal partners, with the public and stakeholders, about what the process is by which they go from being identified in one of those plans or documents through to potential implementation. And that's what this report does. We do have a system whereby we go from the long-range strategy, then the Mayor's Council with board input and provincial input takes a look and identifies what will be in the Mayor's vision. So it takes a subset of those new corridors. There are a couple remaining from previous that may get prioritized into that then provides staff with direction to go away and start this process of going through the three-step business casing that is identified in Figure 2 of your report on this. Most of the corridors at this point have not been identified exactly in the Transport 2050 document, have not been exactly identified for what the technology would be, what the exact alignment would be. So that would be the first step that we look at in an exploratory business case. Assuming that that looks good, the costs and benefits, what the solutions could be, we come forward with a technology and generally where the corridor is. Then if that is indeed one of the priorities of the board and the mayors, we would take that through to a refined business case that really narrows in on where the stations would be using that technology, gets a really good idea about the revenue grade forecasts, all the other benefits that would be achieved through a project like this, and the costs. You get a chance, you and the Mayor's Council, to then look at that and decide whether that should advance or not, if there's funding. And if there is a green light, then it would go to a full business case, which is very in-depth, includes a lot of public engagement, geotechnical work, very detailed ridership analysis, stakeholder engagement, partner collaboration, et cetera, before it would go to an actual decision. This three-step process is designed to obviously go deeper and deeper to better understand the nature of the opportunities and the costs, and to have off-ramps if it's not ready or it doesn't look promising at that point for policymakers to revisit it. It's also designed to support senior government systems for considering projects, whether it be treasury boards at the province or the federal government, and to take into consideration the objectives that they are looking at, not just transportation, but others like climate change or affordable housing. So that's what's informing this process. And we've taken this through the Mayor's Council as well, and we look forward to applying this coming out of the Mayor's vision heading into 2022. And that's it, Chair.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Larry, you have a question for Jeff or a comment?
Yes, I do have a question. It's more for this being the public meeting. Jeff, I know that this is a much better process than we see in many systems because it's much more technically and data grounded than politically just grounded as we see elsewhere. Occasionally, though, we have priorities which are political priorities, overwhelming priorities. And in our particular situation here, the one priority which I think we all know we have is the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and particularly Indigenous reconciliation. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to how that lens comes into play early on in this three-step process. Always worry if it comes into play too late, because then very important things may have already been missed.
Yeah, that's a great question, Larry. Thank you for that. I would say it comes in both in the early stages of this three-step process and actually before it, which is part of the framework that we identify in Figure 1. The work that the board, the Mayor's Council, in partnership with the province in putting forward this network, we have identified and proposed that social equity lens should be applied to this, as should reconciliation. And so looking at how the network performs as a whole, and not just moving people, but those different equity-seeking groups, or how it furthers service to reserves or partnerships with First Nations, et cetera, is part of what brought that together. It's also what's proposed to be part of the prioritization process that we're undertaking with you and the Mayor's Council for which projects and corridors should come forward into the first 10 to 15 years to be looked at. So that would be part of that process then to decide, let's say there's roughly 25 corridors in the proposed Transport 2050, which of the sort of 10 or so that should be studied should come forward in the next 10 years. How do they advance the equity within the network at that time? Then we take that perspective and that gets built into the business casing model about what the evaluation framework should be. So it's not just ridership or congestion relief or a housing, it's about housing for whom, et cetera. And that's a lens that we would look at. And I know that the province is also really leaning in and transforming their processes to look at equity and affordable housing as well when we look at major transportation investments. So we're doing that in lockstep with them.
And I think this is so important because it's really an ethical issue to make sure our system is really responding to those who have no other ways to really move around our region and depend on this absolutely, and that we are understanding that and making that a priority. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. And Jeff, I haven't had an opportunity to publicly say how much we're all going to miss you here at this table. But as I thought it was such a nice thing for you to comment on your team, because I know how much they support you and that you are the person that comes and speaks publicly, but I know there's an amazing team of people that you have mentored along the way. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the work you've done to prepare your team for your departure. So on that note, I just wanted to perhaps use UBCX as a way of looking at this framework that you've done, which I think is awesome that you and your team have prepared. As you know, I live out at UBC and I see a lot of promotion and suggestion that the extension to UBC is coming any day. And that's not really what this planning process is telling the public, correct?
That is correct. And, it's really important to note, we've identified that initiative in previous strategies, just like the framework that we identify in Figure 1. It was part of the 2013 Regional Transportation Strategy and then showed up in the mayor's vision. And as such, that's how something gets into the pipeline for studying. That does not mean, as you go through the study stages, that it necessarily goes sequentially to the next stage. There are stage gates between those, between the exploratory stage, which we did do several years ago, back in 2019, brought to the board and the Mayor's Council, looking at what the different technologies could be to serve to get all the way to UBC, including multiple corridors. And you provided the direction collectively that it should be a SkyTrain extension. That then moved us into the next refined business case, of which we go forward and really get a better understanding about what the costs would be, what the benefits, not just for ridership, congestion relief, housing, all of those kinds of elements that you've said are important. And we'll bring that forward, and you can take a look and get a better understanding about what the pros and the cons would be. There's also the process then of the mayor's vision, which prioritizes, looks at a lot of needs across the region and can say which of these are ready to go to the next stage, whatever that is. It could be the first stage, or if it's already had a refined business case, it could go to a full business case if you say it's ready and the funding and financing is there. We've seen across this region in the past that often things do get paused, whether it's about affordability or other priorities that come forward. They could be regionally driven, provincially and federally informed, then may change the order, et cetera. So it is not a done deal that once something starts that it goes through the full process. There are lots of opportunities for policymakers to check in and provide us guidance about when to move to the next stage.
Thank you. If I may, one of the things that is really I've learned about this process is how important it is for our region to be ready with all these studies, so that if somebody is willing to support us with some financial contribution, then we are in a position with, however, if we had 10 studies complete and ready to go, then we can start making decisions. But until we do these studies and get down with all the detail, we aren't really ready to accept any funding from one of our funding partners.
Thank you. Yeah, we agree. Obviously, as staff, it takes many years to go through these. Now that can get scaled by the size of the project, and Transport 2050 suggests that we should be doing more road-based, surface-based rapid transit, which then might not be quite as technically involved as doing, say, a SkyTrain station, but it still has our SkyTrain extension, but still has all those steps that we have to go through, that the province, the federal government's looking for, that communities want to know and to engage. So it takes time to move through those.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lorraine. I don't see any other questions, Jeff. So why don't we move on to the next item, which is an update on the Broadway Supportive Policies Agreement, I guess the annual report.
I'm turning that over to our director, Sarah Ross, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So in 2018, TransLink and the City of Vancouver signed a supportive policies agreement, which we shortened to SPA, for the Broadway subway project. So that's the extension of the Millennium Line to Arbutus. Now, these are one part of the partnership agreements required for major projects. And the purpose of these agreements is for the host municipality and TransLink to commit to the land use and transportation actions that are outside of the direct scope of the project, but have significant influence on the project's success, particularly in the project's success in generating the ridership that is been expected and for the project. And reporting to decision makers on the progress of these commitments is itself a commitment. And so we are doing that today. This is the second annual report for the Broadway Supportive Policies Agreement. And it's focused on reporting on both the status of those commitments, those planning actions that we've committed to, as well as on the related outcomes. And we've developed performance measures and indicators for those. So I'm pleased to say that all of the commitments are trending well. The city's commitment to complete the Broadway plan was delayed by 1 year due to COVID impacts on the city's engagement processes, but it's advancing and is now targeted for completion next year. They launched extensive phase 3 public engagement this fall. I actually think that closes tomorrow. And the draft land use policy in there is to support housing affordability and economic growth, and creates the capacity for fairly significant increases in population and housing within and jobs, population and jobs within the corridor. And now this is draft, and those will be refined through the process and then presented, of course, to Vancouver City Council, expected this spring. So that plan is advancing. We also continue to the partner agencies, which includes TransLink, the city, and also the province and Metro Vancouver, continue to collaborate regularly. For example, we have an upcoming milestone on an intergovernmental housing workshop focused on housing policy. And overall, this year's annual report shows a positive upward trend in terms of employment, housing, and active transportation in the supportive in the corridor. Unfortunately, due to some lack of data at TransLink, we don't have as much of the transit indicators as we would have liked to. But overall, we are advancing the commitments, and we're seeing progress towards the outcomes. So there is the report, as well as the attached annual report that is in your agenda package. This same material has also been provided to the Mayor's Council. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. I don't see any questions, so thank you again for the report. And it's good to see that everything seems to be on track, so that's great. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the park and ride policy guidelines. And Jeff, are you going to be dealing with this topic?
Yes, I am, Tony. I'll be very brief. This is for the board's visibility. We don't talk a lot about park and ride within our ecosystem of offerings, in part because this region has, compared to many regions, a much lower reliance on park and ride, and that's a result of many things: our geography, the extensiveness of our transit system, our polycentric regional form. But we do, through either our own facilities or in partnership, as you see in the report, have about 7,500 parking spots in park and ride facilities that people regularly use. So these guidelines provide visibility into how we manage those, whether it be around pricing, how we identify new sites, how we adapt them over time, looking as a fast-growing region, how the nature of demand, in whether it's the use of those park and rides or the highest and best use, whether it be around development actually on some of those sites, is done and considered over time, as well as thinking about to what degree we should be locating new sites, along with expansion of our more major rapid transit or rapid bus or other high frequency corridors, especially in two areas that may not have as much local service and penetration to those sites, usually due to the land use or geography associated with that. So back in 2012, the board adopted the actual policy that's shown up in our other regional transportation strategy, et cetera. These guidelines are for us and for our partners to be able to apply to get the best out of our park and ride facilities going forward. And I think I'd like to thank Matt Craig and Rex Hodgson, who have been working with our Regional Transportation Advisory Committee and our municipal partners, and with our real estate group internally on developing and adapting these over time. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. A couple of questions for you. Start with Marcelo.
All right, sorry about that. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Jeff, I really appreciate the work of your team in doing this. It's all the things that we do to make it easier for people to use transit is all very effective. And I do remember many years ago that we had a lot of issues about exactly what we did with the park and rides and how we charged for them, et cetera, et cetera. So I think having a clear policy is excellent. The only the question I have, I know in future you have noted EV chargers. What is the future for that? I mean, we want to encourage the conversion to electric vehicles, and it would be nice to see our park and rides having chargers sooner than later as part of our overall efforts in the region.
Yes, we agree. Even the picture you see here are hybrid vehicles that Evo uses, and I know the adaptation of that or sort of the transition to full EVs is happening. So we've been having conversations already with our partners, whether it be the ride sharing companies, with our partners that actually operate or own some of the lots that they work on, primarily through our real estate division and the commercial partnerships, looking at how we may partner with ICBC or BC Hydro and others to actually deliver this, prioritize spots. There's quite a bit of transition in order to be able to make sure that you have sufficient power, identification of how much demand there is. I think somebody asked a question earlier, maybe it was Lorraine to Chris about on the budget about the transition within the region. It is happening really quickly. We have probably the highest electric vehicle adoption rates in North America. So we do need to get on top of that. And I can report that we are forward looking on that. And so we can come back with a little bit more information on what that strategy looks like, not just at park and rides, but even just adjacent to our stations with our partners.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Marcella. Larry?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Again, excellent document, and I'm glad to see it. One thing it's missing, though, and I see in other similar documents as this, is urban design guidelines. Could you speak to that absence and maybe the possibility of adding some urban design guidelines into this? It's important that we are very good urban design neighbors to those around us, and particularly parking lot urban design has not been a high point in North America. So could you speak to that issue?
Thanks. That's a good catch, Larry. And maybe we should look at, these are always documents that are living and we can adapt them. We should cross-reference, and I'm not saying that this totally answers your question, but we should cross-reference both our station design guidelines. Often these are, directly adjacent as you see here, and it does speak to some of that, those issues that you're talking about lighting, about accessibility, safety and security, et cetera, and which would apply into our lots as well. We also have our transit-oriented communities guidelines that really are around the 6 Ds that we use and do apply to these areas, both for our own facilities and what we're looking for with municipalities and with developers that are planning around the frequent transit network on what the expectations are, including the physical design, the integration of sidewalks, et cetera. So I think that would be step number one, would be to cross-reference that to make sure that's being applied. And I think we could do more probably in that regard about some of the actual urban design elements.
I think it would be important, and particularly adding sustainability design features in as well. It's not only important for us as good neighbors, but also important for our partners to understand our expectations for urban design when we are in those partnerships. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Andy?
Yeah, thank you. Larry stole a bit of my thunder. I was coming from a slightly different angle, but under the technology part of the report, it talks to what Larry talked about, and I'm thinking from the customer experience point of view. For using a park and ride is a fairly bleak. I'm just thinking if you used a park and ride in the last couple of weeks and you were one of the late entrants and you probably couldn't even see the station through the downpour that you have to trudge through. It's not a particularly inviting environment to start your transit experience of. So it seems to have been the poor cousin on a lot of the discussions we've had around the transit experience. And I'm really interested in the technology aspect as we go forward. And it's maybe something we didn't discuss as much as in the 2050 as we could have done as well, about maybe reutilizing these spaces in different ways. And I like the comments we've made about prioritization, about using valuable real estate across Metro Vancouver and utilizing it in maybe different ways than we have before, rather than just parking automobiles on it and leaving them there. I think this will be an area where, as we develop with Marcella's comments of electric vehicles, but also as we move towards more mobility as a service, that these areas of real estate and areas that are not maybe as on frequent service, there's potentials there. And I think seeing how that might have been used, and I'm thinking more in the congested areas around the world, Europe's and Asia's, if there are models that we can pick up and get best practices of, it seems an under-discussed area that we've had before. So I think it's very, very interesting. I think there's some huge potentials there. And I'm sure we can make better usage of the spaces that we currently have and those available. So your comments towards a live document, I think, are very pertinent and something that maybe we can turn our minds to in the upcoming investment plans. So thanks for the report, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Just one note on that. We agree. Part of the theme of this is we shouldn't view these as static facilities, that they need to evolve, as I mentioned, with a region where we're adding 35 to 40,000 people per year, and especially in these areas where we have a higher use of park and ride, south of the Fraser, northeast sector, et cetera. They're the fastest areas of growth. So we need to be transforming both the size of those, the value of that land is changing very quickly. So we need to be thinking about how do we adapt it. And as new service offerings come up, whether they be on demand, electric bikes, et cetera, how are we thinking about that? So we do have our new mobility group working with our real estate group on that. We also look to our peers, people like Metrolinx, in Toronto, who have more than 10 times the number of spots that we do, and so are facing this at a much greater scale about how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, and the whole question is bigger better, or is it prioritization, as you mentioned, and finding the balance between those two rationales would be an interesting exercise.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands. So Jeff, I think that concludes probably your last presentation to the board in a public setting. So I just, again, on behalf of the board, just want to express my appreciation to you for your dedication, your professionalism, and your time at TransLink. I think particularly in the last few years where we've been working on that major sort of planning document 2050, I think you should take pride in that in terms of the effort and your contribution to that document, which will hopefully serve us well for the next 30 years. So all the best to you, Jeff, and thank you again.
Thanks, Tony.
Well done.
Okay, so that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. There's 6 items in the consent agenda. There's minutes for approval, 2 decisions, and 3 pieces for information. Does anyone have any questions on any of the items in the consent agenda?
I would just move all the recommendations.
Okay, Larry's moved it. Marcella, I think
I'll
you have.
second it, and then you can.
Okay, Lorraine seconds it, and then Marcella, you have a question.
Thanks. I do have a question. It's on the Pattullo Bridge Condition Monitoring Report, which obviously is excellent, and we've been watching this for some period of time. I'm curious of the impact of the high waters, whether they've are planning to do any specific studies or inspection regarding the high waters we've experienced this last couple of weeks. I'm looking at the river hydraulics and other issues and how the bridge is bearing up. So just a question to management. I'm not sure who can answer that question.
Marcella, it's Jeff Busby here.
Oh, there you are, Jeff. I couldn't tell that you were on. Thank you.
So thanks for the question. We're obviously monitoring the hydraulics along the bridge much more regularly now. We've got monthly monitoring that's underway. Most of that is related to making sure we're understanding the impacts of the new bridge and the changes that are being introduced to the river hydraulics from the new bridge. I think we have a pretty good handle on it given the frequency of that monitoring. A lot of the flooding related concerns are not in the Fraser River Valley. It's more of the tributary rivers. And so typically our time period of greatest concern is the spring freshet season. So appreciate you raising the issue, and we are working very closely with the province and the contractor for the new replacement bridge to take any action if those monitoring activities suggest we need to.
Jeff, thanks very much. And just, if I may ask just one more question, Tony. I should know this after all these years. Is TransLink responsible for decommissioning the old bridge once the new bridge is in operation? Or is that the government?
The province will be responsible. So we are currently negotiating an agreement that will hand over the existing bridge once the traffic moves over to the replacement, and then they'll assume the responsibility for decommissioning.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that reminder, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Marcella. So we have someone has moved it and seconded. So in terms of the consent agenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the end of our public board meeting. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank our delegations who came to speak, and then I want to thank everyone for participating. And I know that I'll be looking forward to viewing it on YouTube in the next quarter, Lorraine. So you'll have at least one fan out there at the public meeting.
Thank you, Tony, for your last sharing activity in a public meeting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well done.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tony.